Said that Jesus did not speak to the multitudes without a parable. It was a fulfillment of Scripture by the prophet Asaph. You'll see that in verse 35. The quotation from the Old Testament is from Psalm 78. And in Psalm 78, the prophet Asaph had told a very long history of Israel and God's dealings with Israel. And in that descriptive narrative of God's dealing with Israel, there were some things that began to emerge. And unbeknownst to the people that it was happening to at the time, God was doing these things to them and dealing with them because of their disobedience. They had complained against God, and God punished them. But God had also drew them back to Himself and forgiven them, and it shows also His mercy. And so, although these things were not evident at the time, Asaph is speaking in parables. He is talking about the plan of God, and now it is a fulfillment that Jesus is doing the same thing. He is speaking to the crowd in parables. They may not understand everything that is happening to them at that moment, but the Son of Man is speaking in parables about the kingdom to them. And so now we come to verse 36, and it says that then Jesus sent the multitude away. He is finished with the crowds for now, and He now turns back towards the house that He was in before chapter 13. It says He went into the house, and His disciples came unto Him, saying, and let's go ahead and read through verse 43. Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, the good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil, the harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth His angels, and they shall gather out of His kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath ears to hear, let him hear. And so Jesus has moved from addressing the crowds, and now He has moved into a house. He has gone from the shores of Galilee on the beach, standing in a boat and sitting in a boat and teaching, and now He has sent the multitudes away. He has moved back into the house, and now He is teaching His disciples. His disciples request an explanation of the parable of the tares. We looked at it last week. All the imagery is unfolded before us. We have a few verses 37 through 39, a list, don't we? We have all the characters in the parable except for one, but we have their definition. It says there, the field is the world. The good seed is, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The good seed are the children of the kingdom. There is one character that is not mentioned, and it's the servants. It is a reminder that when we look at parables, we don't have to identify every element in the parable, because when we do that, we might be missing the point. The point is, in this parable, is that that the kingdom is a global matter, not just a local matter. It is not just for Israel, it is for the whole world. And now we see that the field is the world. It is the kingdom. It is not the church. It is the kingdom. Anything that, where are the limits of God? Can God be limited to Pulaski County? Will He be limited to this building right here? Will God be limited to Saline in Pulaski County? May we throw in one more county, Grant County? Or is it just Arkansas? Is God the God of the United States, or is He the God of the world? A kingdom has a king, and a kingdom has a domain. Dear friend, God is the king, and His domain is everything known to Him. There are probably places that we have never explored, never been to, but dear friend, rest assured that God knows and He has been there. The whole world is the kingdom. And so He is describing the kingdom for the multitudes. They may have been rejecting Jesus. They may not believe in Jesus at this point. And Jesus is outlaying here for them an understanding of the kingdom. It is not just local, but it is also global. And so He says here that he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. Jesus is the Son of Man, and He is the sower. We made this easy connection with Hosea chapter 2 and verse 23 about God sowing in the earth. And we can see that God is the best sower. Here Jesus is the sower, and He is sowing good seed in the world. And also we have the tares. They're the children of the wicked one. We start to see a division, don't we? We start to see two different kinds of people. We see wheat on one hand, and we see tares on the other. There is an appeal here for believing in Jesus. There's an appeal that is happening here, that in the whole world, that everyone will have a chance to respond positively to the plan of God. The seed is being sowed throughout the world about the kingdom, and then there is going to be fruit in some, and there's going to be fruit in the others. You will know them by their fruit. Notice in verse 39, the source of the problem is the enemy that sowed them is the devil. But then you'll also notice something else develops, and this is the main thrust of the parable, is that at the end of the age, so we were talking about here something that was local, but now we realize that it is global. We are oftentimes get bogged down in time as well, don't we? We think about the current time. We think about what we're going to do today. We think about what we're going to do tomorrow. We think about how far we can look ahead is about a week or a month or a year. We start planning. But Jesus says, I am thinking bigger than that. I am thinking not just local, but I'm thinking global. But I'm also thinking in terms of time. I'm thinking to the end of the age. And He says here that there will be a harvest at the end of the age. I said a while ago that it was the servants that were not identified. The servants may have something to do with understanding the inquiry of people into what is happening. What the servants do here is they help us to realize what is happening in the kingdom. When they look out into the field, the servants realize that the crop is different. It looks so similar at first. The zizania growing next to the wheat, we couldn't tell the difference. But at some point, there's a realization that there are differences in the world, and there are differences between kinds of people. And so Jesus says at the end of the age, there's going to be a harvest, and His angels are going to be the reapers. He is going to send His reapers out, and they are going to gather all of the wheat and all of the tares. The tares are going to be bundled up and they're going to be burned, and the wheat is going to be bundled up and is going to be put into the Lord's granary. And so notice there in verse 40, this is where the whole parable is sort of defined, and we start to see what the point of the parable is. In verse 40, He says, As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be in the end of this world. Verse 41, The Son of Man shall send forth His angels, and they shall gather out of His kingdom all things that offend, and them which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a fiery furnace. There will be wailing, and there will be gnashing of teeth. There is not much said yet about the righteous, about the wheat, except in verse 43. He spends a great deal of time in verses 40 through 42 talking about how the tares are going to be dealt with. Dear friend, the kingdom is going to be in the world, and it's going to be surrounded by bad seed. The devil is at work, and also Jesus is at work, aren't they? And so we see that there is going to be a gathering out of all the kingdom, all things that are wrong, all things that are sinful, all things that are out of line, out of step with the will of God, all of the sinful people, all those who have been causing chaos in the kingdom will be gathered up, and they will be burned and cast into a fiery furnace. I don't have to spend a lot of time defining the fiery furnace, but it is an allusion from the book of Daniel. When the three Hebrew boys were thrown into the fiery furnace, they were innocent, but they were thrown in the fiery furnace by wicked people. And you see here at the end of the age, there's going to be a sort of vindication, that God will have the last word, that there will be people that will be in this world and they will be seemingly getting away with sinful things and wickedness, and that there is no punishment for them. But here Jesus is saying that things are going to be turned upside down. Those who were formerly cast into the fiery furnace wrongly, now the wicked are going to be taken and they're going to be cast into the fiery furnace. But in the case of Daniel, when Jesus was there in the fiery furnace, holding and walking there with them and protecting them from the fires, as the fires licked up to their toes and their bodies, and they were not harmed. Here in this fiery furnace, the wicked shall be burned up, and there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. There was no wailing and gnashing of teeth in the fiery furnace in Daniel. There was comfort and solace, and there was a connection with the Lord, that the Lord stood by them and protected them. But here they are severed from the kingdom. They are cast out of the kingdom, and they are cast into the fiery furnace, and there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. It's getting a little hot in here, isn't it? We are talking about a place called hell. It is a real place. It is a place of destruction. It is a place of torment. It is a place of misery. And this is where the tares will be bundled up and cast into the fiery furnace, and there will be no reprieve. And so there's an appeal here to answer the Lord and to respond positively to His call of the kingdom. There will be the wailing and gnashing of teeth. Verse 43 tells us the outcome of the wheat. It says, "Then shall the righteous," and that would be the wheat who lives in the kingdom among the tares, they are the fruit of the Son of Man, "they will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father." Did you notice that this is in the future tense? I thought that we were already the light of the world. You are the light of the world. But dear friend, don't ever mistake and misunderstand that God's people have something better waiting on them in eternity. It says the sun will shine. Shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. We're also reminded of another aspect of the kingdom. Not only will believers be something in the kingdom when it's consummated that they are not today, but the kingdom itself will be cleansed of all wickedness. All of the tares will be thrown out of the kingdom, and the kingdom will be consummated, and it will be pure, and there will be a further glorifying of the Lord in the kingdom by believers. And so he ends this explanation of the parable in verse 43 with, "He who hath ears to hear, let him hear." And notice here in verse 44, follow along with me, he begins a series of 3 parables that he's going to give. Listen, remember who he's talking to. He is talking to the disciples. And he says there in verse 44, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto treasure hid in a field, the which when a man hath found, he hideth, and for joy thereof goeth and selleth all that he hath, and buyeth that field." Oh, it's a really neat picture if you look at it here. It's about a laborer who is laboring in a field. He is working in a field, and he discovers something. It's unexpected. It is something that while he's working, while he's going about his normal routines of life, he is working in the fields, he is some kind of laborer or a peasant, he comes across a treasure that's hidden in the ground. You say, well, this could never happen. Actually, in that day and age, a lot of people, they didn't have Chase Bank. They didn't have Regions Bank. They didn't have all of these different big banks that we didn't have that kind of system. People would literally take their treasures and in jars or in boxes and bury them in the ground. And so here's how this worked. If the treasure was found, whoever's land it was found on, it belonged to the landowner. So you see what the man does. He says, I have found this treasure. It doesn't belong to me, even though I have found it. It really legally belongs to the owner of the land. So he looks around. No one's looking. He doesn't think that anyone has seen that he's found this treasure. And so it says there in verse 44 that he hides it. He puts it back in the ground. He covers it up. And then he begins to take drastic measures to acquire the field. He knows that whoever owns the field will own the treasure. And so he goes home and he begins to get all of his possessions together. He begins to gather everything up. And he says to himself, I'm going to sell everything that I own to obtain that treasure. That treasure is worth having. And so he gets everything and he sells everything and he gets the money from the selling of all his possessions. And he goes and he buys that field so he can have the treasure. In verse 44, what Jesus is telling you is that the treasure is invaluable. You as a disciple, you will do anything to obtain it. It is worth more than anything that the man has. Anything that the man can do to acquire this treasure, he will sell everything that he has and acquire that treasure. That is how the kingdom is. Notice in verse 45 and 46, we have another little parable. And it says here in verse 45, again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a merchant man. By the way, that word there is emporio. It's where we get the word emporium. He is a merchant man, seeking goodly pearls, who when he had found one pearl of great price, he went and sold all that he had, and he bought it. These two parables have a similar point. And it's talking here, there's one aspect that's different, is that while the peasant worker out in the field accidentally found it, he discovered it unexpectedly, this merchant was seeking a treasure. You see that there? He was seeking it. He was desiring it. He had made it his mission to find this pearl of great price. And this pearl of great price, as you can tell, it represents the kingdom. It is a priceless heirloom. It is a priceless jewel. And so he says that everything that I have is worth getting rid of to obtain that one little treasure. In both of these parables, don't miss the point in that we might think, well, that's kind of a bad example in verse 44 of a man that would maybe be deceptive. That's not the point. The point is that he's willing to do anything that he can to obtain the treasure. Let me remind you very quickly, another example of that missing the point and getting sidetracked with the ethical issues involved would be the parable about Jesus of the lost sheep. When he leaves the 99 and he goes after the one, it's not that he's some irresponsible shepherd and does not understand the value of his sheep. In fact, that is the very point of the parable, is that even one is valuable enough to risk the 99. And so he goes out for that one. The same here in verse 44 and then in 45 and 46 concerning this. There is nothing in their lives that is more valuable than the kingdom. This has, no doubt, a discipleship application to it. He is talking to the disciples. They are hearing him talk about the kingdom. And so in our own lives, we can see that the kingdom, the pursuit of everything in the kingdom, should be our number one priority in our life. We should not let anything in our life get in the way of pursuing the kingdom. It is not that we're talking about salvation. We're talking about pursuing the the values of the kingdom, pursuing the goals of the kingdom, making it a priority in your life. What can you do for the kingdom? It is not going to be, you're not talking about salvation. We're talking about service and discipleship. Laying everything aside. Do you remember what Jesus told Zacchaeus? He says, sell everything you have. And he gave half to the poor, and then he began serving Jesus. You remember the rich man who asked, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, sell everything you have and follow me. And so this is the same idea here. Notice in 47 through 50, we have another parable. This is the third parable that He's given to the disciples. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like unto a net that was cast into the sea and gathered of every kind, which when it was full, they drew to shore and sat down and gathered the good into vessels, but cast the bad away. So shall it be at the end of the world. The angels shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just, and shall cast them into the furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gnashing of teeth. This parable has the parable, and then it has an explanation to it. They don't ask for an explanation. Jesus just gives it to them. Notice the story here, and it's a story about fishermen that are casting their drag net, casting their net into the Sea of Galilee or any other sea. And it has the picture here of the net would catch all kinds of different fish. Maybe even catch a spare tire, right? Maybe even catch some old anchor. It might even catch some trash. It might catch some kind of shrimp or a crab. It'll catch a turtle. It'll catch all kinds of things. He says the kingdom of heaven is like a net. It will catch all kinds and gather all kinds of different species as it goes. We're thinking about the kingdom as it goes over time, aren't we? As it goes from the time of Jesus all the way to the end of the age. And in the process, as the kingdom is advancing, as the kingdom is moving forward, it catches all kinds of creatures. And so it says here in verse 48, when it was full, they came up to the shore. And now they sit down and they begin to sort out their catch. There is a sorting, isn't there? And they gathered the good fish into vessels, and the bad, they threw it out. There are some that the kingdom is going to catch, but there's going to be some that won't follow through with full commitment. There will be some that will identify with the kingdom, but they won't be bearing the fruit that the wheat bears. They won't be bearing the fruit that is talked about in verse 9 of chapter 13. They are in the kingdom, they are among the kingdom, but there's going to be a sorting out by the angels. And notice what it says. The emphasis is not on the good fish here, is it? The emphasis is on the bad fish. Notice at the end of verse 48, but cast the bad away. In verse 49 and 50, Jesus begins to talk about the bad fish, the bad creatures that are caught in this net. He said, so shall it be at the end of the world. We're talking about in the future time. We're talking about at the end of the age. The kingdom will be consummated and it will be purified at the end of the age, and it will last 1,000 years on this earth. There will be a millennial reign of Christ. And before that, it will be purified. The wicked will be cast out. Those who have caused chaos in the kingdom will be dispelled from the kingdom and not to re-enter. And so it says, sever the wicked among the just, and will cast them into, there it is again, a fiery furnace. It is the same furnace that he's talking about in the previous parable. And there will be misery, and there will be disappointment, and there will be sadness, and there will be torment, and there will be torture in the place that he's in this fiery furnace that he's talking about. Notice here in verses 51 and 52, Jesus closes his words. He closes this, he brings an end to this parabolic discourse about the kingdom. And he says this, Jesus saith to them, he's talking to the disciples, and he says, have you understood all these things? We're reminded at the beginning of the chapter in verses 10 through 17, they say, why are you teaching in parables? And he's saying, it is given to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom. And so now Jesus comes back to them and he says, have you understood these things? And they say, yes, I believe that they are telling the truth. Maybe they don't have a full understanding of all things, because you'll see in the 15th chapter of Matthew in verse 16, they are still a little dull. They are still coming along in maturity of understanding. But they do probably catch the main points of these parables. They probably do grasp the parables about the kingdom and the end of the age, and how the kingdom is not just local, but it's global. How there will be a time in the future when the kingdom will be purified. And so they've probably grasped all these things. Notice here in verse 52, Jesus is going to tell them then what will be their role in this kingdom. We haven't heard anything like this, have we? Not up to this point. All we've heard is the kingdom is like this, it is like this, and Jesus is explaining and explaining, but here is the application. Here is the role of the disciple. Dear friend, don't you want to know what your role is in this kingdom? If you are a child of God, you'll want to know, what am I supposed to do? How can I serve Him? How can I go forward? If you're not in the kingdom, you'll be severed and you'll be cast into a fiery furnace. But for those who believe in Jesus, who understand that He is the Son of Man, and He is the good sower, He is the one who's sowing seed in the field, and this field is the world, what will be my role in it as a child of God? And so He says here in verse 52, then He said unto them, therefore, and this is a little kind of a parable, isn't it? He says, therefore, every scribe which is instructed unto the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which bringeth forth out of his treasure things new and old. I told you a while ago that word merchant, it is where we transliterate the word emporium. Here's another interesting Greek word. The word for treasure is where we transliterate the word thesaurus. It is a thesaurus. You know what it is? It's like a book of synonyms, isn't it? I can't think of the word. And so I think of a few words, but it's not the word I'm trying to think of. So I go to my bookshelf and I pull the thesaurus and I open it up and I look up my words, and it gives me all kinds of list of words. And my mind begins to expound and expand on this. And now that's what I was looking for. It is a treasure of things that I can use at some point. And he's saying here that a scribe is like a man, and this is what the disciple is. He is instructed. He has understood all of these things. Every scribe, I think of it's like this, dear friend. You're talking to your children, and you'll say to your son, now a good young man will do this and this. Jesus is talking to His disciples and say, now every scribe which has been instructed, and Jesus is the great teacher instructing His disciples here. And so they have learned from the master teacher, from the one who is the interpreter of Torah, the one who has all of the secrets of those things which are hidden. He is instructing His disciples. And he says here, every scribe who has been taught, every scribe who has been instructed in these things, notice what he says, unto the kingdom of heaven, and that's what he's been talking about in all of these verses, is like unto a man that is an householder. He is one who owns a great house. The disciple is one who lives he is a person that has been blessed, and he is experiencing the blessings of God. He is in a great house, and he has a treasure before him. All of these, what Jesus is saying here is all of these things that He's instructed them in is a treasure. And then he makes this second point here. And it says, it is like unto things new and old that He brings out. And we can go all the way back to the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus was talking about how He has not come to abolish the law, but He has come to fulfill it. What He is talking about here is the entire plan of God. The disciple who is instructed by Jesus, the one who follows Jesus and wants to have Jesus as his teacher, as her guide in life, will be instructed and will have a treasure trove of knowledge. Notice what he does here. He said, which bring forth out. You see that? It is it's the same word that is often used to throw out, to cast out. And so he says here, he'll take from his treasure that he has been instructed in, and he will throw it out there. He will not be stingy with it. He will not withhold it. He will, when he sees the opportunity, when he has a guest that comes to his door or his house, he will bring his treasures out, and he says, I want to share with you everything that I have. Dear friend, are you getting it? What Jesus has done for your life, you're supposed to share with other people. You're supposed to take out of that treasure where the blessings of God have been accumulated in this treasure and cast them out like they're nothing. Like they don't mean anything as far as I've got to hold on to this. I've got to withhold this. I'm stingy. We think about Scrooge this time of year, don't we? Those who are selfish and self-centered. No, that's not the kind of disciple that he's talking about. He's talking about a disciple who would not withhold something from a guest. Dear friend, as you go in the world, here is the application. You are knowing something about the kingdom now. You're knowing what it's like. You're knowing the sacrifices that you would make, how priceless it is, how invaluable it is. Whose domain does it involve? It is God's domain. Will there be at the end of the age a judgment? Yes, there will be a judgment, but those who are a part of God's wheat, who are a part of the children of the kingdom, will have treasure, and they are to share willingly with what God has given them. I didn't think about it, but what a great Thanksgiving message it is, isn't it? What a great Christmas message it is. We can talk about Christmas and Thanksgiving all year long if you're a child of God, because God has been so good to us. He has blessed us. We are thankful. We recognize God, and we recognize His plan is progressing, and I am following in faithfulness, and I am going to share with others how God has blessed me. As we stand, let's have a song of invitation. Today is the day. Today is your day to acknowledge what God is leading you to do. If He's leading you to come and be saved today, do not ignore that call. Do not ignore the drawing of the Holy Spirit. Maybe today is the day where you renew your walk with God. Maybe you haven't really valued the kingdom like you should. Maybe it's time to renew your fellowship with God. Maybe if you haven't been baptized, you can come for baptism today. Maybe you want to come and unite with New Haven in church membership today. Serve with us here, advancing the kingdom as the Lord directs, as we sing.